The most experienced engineer in the room is also the most likely to be laid off. That's not an accident. That's a design choice. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a room after a senior engineer finishes speaking. Not the silence of people thinking, the silence of people waiting for it to be over. This is where it begins. Not with a layoff notice, not with a restructuring email. It begins in a meeting, somewhere ordinary, when someone with 15 years of accumulated scar tissue says, "I've seen this before. This won't work." And the room moves on. We have built systems, organizational systems, economic systems, cultural systems that are structurally allergic to exactly the kind of knowledge that would save them. Let's talk about how. The illusion of measurability. Junior engineers produce visible output, lines of code, tickets closed, features shipped. Their contribution fits neatly into a spreadsheet, and spreadsheets are how modern organizations understand value. Senior engineers produce something different. They produce the absence of catastrophe. They are the reason the production server didn't go down on a Friday night. They are the reason the architecture didn't need to be rebuilt from scratch 18 months later. They are the reason a junior engineer's clever solution didn't become a $4 million incident in 2 years. But you cannot put prevented disaster in a performance review. You cannot measure the meeting that didn't happen, the bug that was never written, the decision that was walked back before it caused irreversible damage. So organizations don't. They measure what they can see, and what they can see increasingly looks like the junior engineer. The first warning sign. The warning signs follow a pattern so consistent it feels almost scripted. First, the senior engineers become expensive, not because their value decreases, but because their salaries compound while their visible output, measured in the wrong currency, appears flat. A junior engineer costs $60,000 and closes 40 tickets a sprint. A senior engineer costs $160,000 and closes 12 tickets a sprint, because 8 of those hours were spent in conversations that prevented 40 tickets from ever needing to exist. The spreadsheet does not capture this. The spreadsheet sees a 4-to-1 productivity gap, and somewhere a decision is made. This is the first warning sign, when an organization begins optimizing for the cost of expertise rather than the cost of its absence. The second warning sign. The second warning sign is subtler and more dangerous. It arrives as a cultural shift. Slowly, the meetings where senior engineers raise concerns become meetings where their concerns are acknowledged and then quietly deprioritized. The post-mortem where someone said, "We need to address the technical debt in the authentication layer," produces a ticket that lives in the backlog for 14 months. The architecture review where someone flagged a cascading dependency risk gets overridden because the release date is fixed and the concern is theoretical. Theoretical. That word does a tremendous amount of damage in technology organizations because what the senior engineer is describing is never theoretical to them. It is a memory. It is something they watched happen somewhere else, to someone else's system, and they carry it with them like a scar. When they say this will fail, they are not speculating. They are pattern matching across a decade of failures that the organization has not yet lived through. But institutional memory is not transferable through urgency, and the people making decisions are often too new to the organization or too far from the code to distinguish between a senior engineer catastrophizing and a senior engineer trying to prevent a catastrophe. The mechanism of replacement. Here is where it gets architectural. When a company decides to reduce headcount, senior engineers are disproportionately targeted for 3 compounding reasons. Their salaries are the highest. Their value is the hardest to defend in a spreadsheet. And this is the part that haunts me. They have often been the most honest about the organization's problems. Honesty in a system under financial pressure is a liability. The engineers who raise concerns are the engineers whose names are associated with problems. Even if they were trying to prevent those problems, even if they were right. There is a psychological mechanism inside organizations where the person who named the risk becomes confused with the risk itself. And when the cuts come, confusion is expensive. So they go, and with them goes the institutional memory, the unwritten rules of the system, the knowledge of why the authentication layer was built in that specific way in 2019, the awareness of which third-party dependency will break if you upgrade the runtime. None of that is documented because it was never asked to be documented, because it was living inside a person and the person was in the building and nobody imagined a world where they wouldn't be. The collapse. The collapse, when it comes, is never sudden. It only appears sudden from the outside. From the inside, it was a series of small fires that nobody had the context to recognize as connected. An outage here, a regression there, a junior engineer who made a decision that a senior engineer would have known instinctively was wrong, not because the junior engineer was incompetent, but because they hadn't yet lived through the consequences of that particular class of decision. The system fails, the post-mortem happens, and in the post-mortem someone says, we need someone with more experience on this area of the code base. The room is quiet, because the person with more experience on that area of the code base was let go 14 months ago, and with them went everything they knew. The universal implication. This is not a story about technology. It is not even really a story about engineering. It is a story about what happens when systems optimize for the measurable at the expense of the essential, when we mistake visibility for value and silence for incompetence. Every organization that has done this has paid for it. Not always immediately. Sometimes the bill takes years to arrive, but it always arrives. The most dangerous moment in any system is not when something breaks. It is when the people who could see the breaking coming are no longer in the room. And the most unsettling part, the system often doesn't know they're gone until it's already too late to call them back.